Believe it or not, one of the most common questions I receive while vlogging in different churches over the summer was about the placement of the tabernacle. Why in some churches is the tabernacle behind the altar, and in others is it off to the side or even in a side chapel? Unlike most Catholicism in Focus videos that tackle complex issues with multifaceted answers, the answer to this question is actually pretty straightforward. The church tells us exactly where it prefers the tabernacle to be. Understanding why it says this and determining if we agree, now that's a different story. This is Catholicism in Focus. For those who might be unfamiliar with the concept, Catholics believe that at the celebration of the Mass, the ordinary species of bread and wine are transformed by the Holy Spirit into the real presence of Christ's body and blood. In itself, this is a very complicated theological issue, one that will require its own episode next semester. But I mention it now for this reason. When you have something as precious as the real presence of Christ, you can't just throw it away or put it back into the carton of wafers. It must be stored in a safe, respectable place. Hence, the tabernacle. In the general instruction of the Roman Missal, or Germ, the Universal Church prescribes that the Blessed Sacrament should be reserved in a place that is noble, prominent, readily visible, beautifully decorated, and suitable for prayer, and that the tabernacle itself should be immovable, be made of solid and inviolable material that is not transparent, and be locked in such a way that the danger of profanation is prevented to the greatest extent possible. To put something as important as the Blessed Sacrament in an unbecoming, dirty, or simply ordinary place, far from the attention of those present, just wouldn't make sense. The placement and treatment of the tabernacle should reflect the reverence its contents are due. So, does that mean that it can be placed anywhere as long as it's in a noble and readily visible place? No, not exactly. While it was customary for many years to place the tabernacle on or behind the main altar, making it the central focus of the entire church building, today, because of the renewed theology of Eucharist, the church suggests that another place might be more appropriate. Continuing in the Germ, the church teaches, it is more in keeping with the meaning of the sign that the tabernacle in which the Most Holy Eucharist is reserved not be on an altar in which Mass is celebrated. Consequently, it is preferable that the tabernacle be located, according to the judgment of the diocesan bishop, either in the sanctuary, apart from the altar of celebration, in a form and place more appropriate, not excluding on an old altar no longer used for celebration, or even in some chapel suitable for the faithful's private adoration and prayer, and organically connected to the church and readily visible to the Christian faithful. In other words, the Universal Church does not outright forbid that the tabernacle be located behind or connected to the main altar, but it does say that other places are more appropriate, such as a prominent location away from the altar, even as far away as a side chapel. For many, this might seem confusing. If the tabernacle is so important, the place where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, why would we put it off to the side? Why wouldn't it be placed in the most prominent place, front and center? One reason given for this change was actually to promote greater devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and to encourage prayer. In big churches, where the tabernacle is located high on a center altar, the average person is not afforded the possibility of getting very close to it or praying around it. They can pray from the pews, sure, but sometimes this might be hundreds of feet away. Add that to the fact that many old and beautiful churches are the destination of pilgrims and tourists alike, there is the possibility that the tabernacle will be viewed more as a piece of art than a holy receptacle, lacking its due reverence, not to mention making it nearly impossible for people to sit quietly in front of the tabernacle and pray. By placing it off to the side, or even in a separate chapel devoted specifically to prayer and devotion, people are able to pray uninterrupted even when other things are happening in the sanctuary. But even more important than this, and likely the primary motivation behind the rubric, is that placing the Blessed Sacrament in the most prominent place in the church presents a potential confusion of signs and might even serve as a distraction during liturgical celebrations. As important as the Eucharistic elements are, the real presence of Christ in our midst, the Church recognizes that there are other ways in which Christ is present during our liturgies. He is present in the sacrifice of the Mass, not only in the person of the minister, but especially under the Eucharistic elements. He is present in the Word, since it is He Himself who speaks when the Holy Scriptures are read in the Church. He is present, lastly, when the Church prays and sings, for He promised, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered, together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." Especially prior to the conclusion of the Eucharistic prayer, in which the newly offered gifts are transformed into the body and blood of Christ, there might be the temptation to give greater reverence and focus to the tabernacle than to the celebration at hand. Why would we focus on the scriptures or altar when there are consecrated hosts already in the tabernacle? Obviously, we do this because the source and summit of our Christian life is the entire Eucharistic celebration, not simply the Eucharistic elements. While Christ is equally present at Mass, as in, say, a communion service where we take leftover hosts from the tabernacle, a communion service is not a sacrament per se. What is taking place on the altar, the culmination of our prayers, sacrifices, and offerings, is in fact more significant than the Blessed Sacrament reserved in the tabernacle in itself. Which presents the potential for the opposite problem, that the reservation of the Blessed Sacrament might be ignored completely, which is also not appropriate. To put this issue into a practical situation, what should a priest do during the Mass when walking between the altar and the tabernacle? Does he bow to the altar, turning his back on the tabernacle? Or does he genuflect to the tabernacle, neglecting the altar? Either way, even if he tries to do both, there is still confusion and the potential irreverence to an important sign. By placing the tabernacle away from the main altar, there is no chance of confusing signs or distracting the worshippers. What is important during the liturgy is the sacrifice taking place, and what is important in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel is private prayer and devotion. Naturally, some have been apprehensive about this provision and have argued that moving the tabernacle has had the opposite effect on communities. Without the Blessed Sacrament placed in a prominent place, people have been left with weaker devotion to it, show no reverence in the sanctuary, or even feel that the Mass is missing a key feature. For this reason, as with most laws in the Church, the prescriptions here are not uniform or general in nature, and many pastoral exceptions can be made by a bishop. There might be reasons for keeping the tabernacle fixed to the center altar, and there is certainly no mandate that tabernacles must be ripped out of the wall and placed elsewhere. In some cases, doing so would certainly have a terrible effect on worship. But just because there is room for exception doesn't mean that our churches should so quickly lean on them. While some will certainly argue that moving the tabernacle leaves the church feeling less sacred or that proper reverence has diminished, this might be less of a reason for an exception and more of an indication that better catechesis is needed. Do people recognize that the real presence of Christ is in the word proclaimed? Do they understand the power of the Eucharistic prayer taking place before their eyes? Do they know that the altar is also holy and should be bowed to in the absence of a tabernacle? There is no doubt that moving such a significant fixture in the church might cause some pastoral concerns. But my guess is that the problem has less to do with the location of the tabernacle and more to do with a Eucharistic theology that needs some work. Maybe this is simply an opportunity that we need to talk about what's really lacking in our worship. Thanks for watching this episode of Catholicism in Focus. If you like this video, you might like these videos on other liturgical subjects. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and check out all that Breaking in the Habit Media has to offer on social media.